Change in plans for this episode because we've had a recent development on the subreddit. Take a look at this image that Delicious Prune 7026 sent in one of the threads. Yep, that plastic vial is coated with osmium dioxide, which was deposited from the formation of osmium tetroxide. This was, as he told me, over the course of 5 years of storage. Now, my osmium bead I've had stored in a plastic container, not unlike that one, for, over 5 years, and nothing like that ever happened, ever. So that really does surprise me. So what this basically shows is that I really don't know as much about sintered osmium as I think I do. Clearly I don't. So that's why I tagged Laughed My Way at the Bank in that thread so that way he could comment. He did, thankfully, and he confirmed that is definitely staining from osmium tetroxide. That is, a lining of osmium dioxide on the surface of that plastic. He also made a comment that it really isn't a safety issue. As you saw earlier in the video, osmium tetroxide is extremely reactive, and like he previously said, it probably wouldn't make it out of its own container because, it reacts with things like plastic, wood, skin. It's an extremely powerful oxidizer, and anything it can react with, it will. I would, however, like to get more insights from him about, the actual rate of oxidation for sintered osmium. He's a little bit like that elusive wizard who only surfaces every now and then to give his great wisdom before disappearing for a long period of time again. Yeah, I've never actually worked with sintered osmium before. I've never handled it. I've never done any tests with it. I would like to in the future. I would like to acquire a very small amount of it and do some storage tests with pure oxygen for, somewhat long periods of time, just to see what happens. Because that sample in that picture, that looks like a much older bullion that they used to sell. Those little cylindrical bullions, I've seen those being sold since, I think, before the beads were even selling. Like, we're talking like back in 2011, 2012, I used to see them on the internet, pictures of them. So it is possible that there's a less efficient sintering method to make those. I'm not actually sure. In the picture, that piece of osmium does look very, very solid and very well made. But then again, I'm no expert on sintered osmium, not even close. I only know from the tests that I've done with my own osmium bead and the things that I've learned from that. And yeah, it does appear that, beaded osmium is definitely more resistant to oxidation than the sintered form. There are many people on this subreddit who collect bullion that are also stored in plastic, containers. If anyone has a bullion that was made by Luciteria and they've had it for a year or more, I'd love to hear what kind of condition it's in, or if there's any kind of staining on the plastic or anything like that. Yeah, I think we should get on this and see what's actually up with sintered osmium. And specifically, testing bullion from different manufacturers, like, Metametals and Metal and Luciteria. Just looking at Luciteria's bullions, just by appearance alone, in my brain, I would think, yeah, that looks pretty solid. That's very well polished. It's a mirror polish, in fact, and I would think that that's about as stable in air as beaded crystalline osmium. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But I know I said in the last episode where I spouted on about how, oh yeah, Tetroxide is totally fine, won't oxidize, and then literally the same day I get a picture of a vial that is literally fucking black from osmium tetroxide. So, uh, yeah. Okay, so I'm sure you guys want to see the tests that I ran. The first test that I ran was where I stuck one of my osmium fragments in bleach, which was brought up to nearly a boil. You can see it here. I'm sure the first thing you'll notice when you look at this is the color change in the middle. The part of the fragment where the grain structure is exposed, that's where the most surface area is, and that's going to react the most. The rest of the bead doesn't seem to be doing much, but there is that bit of greenish stuff exuding from the core. This is a good demonstration to show that surface area is very important in determining the reactivity of an object made of osmium. The smooth round bits aren't really exuding that color, it's mostly just the center. So I may not have heaping helpings of this footage because I had to fight the focus on my camera a lot, but I do believe some osmium tetroxide was formed. First, sodium osmate would have formed in that solution, which I think is the green color, but eventually it started turning a sort of darkish yellow color, and I think that may be an indication that some osmium tetroxide was formed. Now the osmium fragment was actually in there for a lot longer than the footage would leave you to believe, so when I measured it, I did get some mass loss. How much exactly, I don't know, because my scale was being really twitchy again, so I took a variety of different mass readings, but, all in all, there was a loss of mass of several milligrams within, maybe 4 to 5 milligrams or so total, no more than that. Now, I think I should explain. The core of that bead is indeed fully dense. It has to be, because molten osmium is about the density of solid rhenium, so it's about 20 grams per cubic centimeter, and molten osmium shrinks quite considerably to a density of 22.59 grams per cubic centimeter, so the core is absolutely fully dense, no doubt about it. It's just the surface area is very, very rocky and jagged because it's a grain structure, and when I smashed the bead apart, it fractured. So it's going to be very, very well grainy and have a lot of surface area. Now, I know I've used the word tests plural throughout this video, and well, there was another test that I wanted to do, but I think Laugh My Way at the Bank would agree with me when I say it's probably not a good idea to do it. And they'll explain why. Well, the test itself, I think, explains itself, because I was planning on putting one of my osmium fragments in molten potassium chlorate at 700 degrees Fahrenheit. And, I've thought about it for a bit, and I've come to the conclusion that it's probably not a good idea, and I probably won't get away with it without, repercussions to my health. Putting osmium in molten potassium chlorate will most likely create not a little bit of osmium tetroxide, but quite a bit of osmium tetroxide, and I really don't want to deal with that, because as soon as I take the osmium out of the molten chlorate, which I'll have to, because then if I let it solidify, I'll just have a big solid chunk that I have to get it out of, and potassium chlorate does not have huge solubility in water or alcohol or anything else like that. So I'd have to basically smash it out, and I don't want to deal with that. I also don't want to risk taking it out of the molten potassium chlorate and having, osmium tetroxide fizzing out of the core of that bead into my eyes. So, yeah, I think this is a case of, better safe than sorry, but, just letting you know that if you do decide or think about putting, any kind of osmium and potassium chlorate, you're probably going to be generating a bunch of osmium tetroxide, and it will become a hazardous situation, I believe. So I should just go ahead and explain that I've put my osmium test bead in stronger oxidizers than, potassium chlorate, like manganese heptoxide, for example. The thing is, though, that manganese heptoxide was actually under room temperature. It was right next to the doorway. It was pretty chilly that day, so it was, maybe around 50 or 60 degrees Fahrenheit, something like that. Um, and potassium chlorate, when it's molten, is, around about 700 degrees Fahrenheit, so that's going to create a much quicker reaction with a piece of osmium. Now, laugh my way at the bank, he told me that, putting osmium metal in manganese heptoxide, that's, going to create osmium tetroxide, but I don't actually think I encountered any. When I did that test, I actually had, at some points, my face over the beaker itself, which is seriously dangerous thing to do, for reasons that have nothing whatsoever to do with osmium tetroxide and everything to do with manganese heptoxide, okay? If that sample were to have exploded, and it absolutely could have, I would have had it. So yeah, I do think, yeah, temperature is definitely important. Yes, manganese heptoxide is a stronger oxidizer, but it's also, you can't really apply heat to it without it, exploding. So it is a little bit of a difference there. Anyway, my whole point is that I had my face over the beaker and I didn't experience any visual symptoms during or afterwards. None whatsoever. There were no stains on my gas mask, and that's made of plastic and rubber. Osmium tetroxide would have stained that for sure. So, maybe some was created, but the vapors didn't get far. I'm not actually sure. I have no idea. Okay, and lastly, sintered osmium. Is it safe? I still maintain up, down, left, and right. Yes, 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 and yes. It is perfectly safe to handle, own, and even store long term. But about that long term part, again, there's that one little cylindrical osmium bullion that, over the course of 5 years, stained its plastic tube pretty badly. I don't know how much osmium tetroxide is needed to yield that amount of staining, but still, that's a little bit, ever so slightly disconcerting. Because, it's not a safety issue, but at the same time, the container's all fucked up. And, even though the bullion itself hasn't been visually altered at all, you still have the evidence of osmium tetroxide being formed. And I'm honestly curious to know if the different sintering methods between some of the different fantastic companies that we have, like Metametals and Metalveimer and Luciteria, if their sintering methods yield different oxidation rates over the long term. I know Metalveimer's bullion, they look fabulous, but some of their smaller bullion look a little bit kind of gritty. Their latest their latest 1 kilogram bullion looks absolutely fantastic, simply wonderful. But the smaller bullion they make, it's just the surface area that I'm curious about. And Metametals, I've seen some of their bullion. I don't actually know what the texture is of them, but the texture is going to affect what the surface area is going to be like. If Luciteria's mirror polished bullion had the same rate of oxidation as that little cylindrical pellet did, I'm going to be very, very, very surprised by that. Now, again, Laughed My Way at the Bank has offered to help. He has access to an electron microscope. He's offered to pay for the use of it out of pocket for Wallstreetosmium, and I honestly think that people should take him up on his offer. Whether that be people who've already purchased a bullion or the companies that themselves that manufacture it, if they could send like a blank bullion to him just to get the oxidation rate tested, I'd be very curious to see what the different rates are for those. Obviously, Mattel Weimer, they have their own sintering method, and they're hoping to utilize it for identification purposes for their bullion, and I'm not suggesting they change that, but I'm simply curious about what that texture is doing to the rate of oxidation via the surface area. And that's pretty much it. I don't think anybody else has had this problem long term with their bullion. If you have, I would very much like to hear about it, and I think everybody else would very much like to hear about it as well. But yeah, I think that's it for this episode. Thanks for watching, thanks for listening, and have a good night.